What would you do if your fiancé's ex-girlfriend showed up at your wedding, wearing a white dress? This isn't just a wedding drama. It's a story of secrets, betrayal, and a love tested in the most shocking way. Stay until the end, because nothing is what it seems, and the truth behind this white dress will change everything. If you love emotional storytelling and dramatic wedding secrets, make sure you subscribe to hear more unforgettable stories. Emily's wedding day unfolded like the kind of fairy tale people dream about but rarely get to live. The venue shimmered under warm golden lights, each detail carefully chosen to mirror her vision of perfection. Guests whispered softly, their eyes following the bride as if she were the only person in the world who mattered. Her gown flowed with elegance, brushing against the aisle as if it carried its own heartbeat. Every step Emily took felt like a promise, a step closer to forever. Daniel stood waiting, his posture steady, his eyes locked on hers, and in that gaze, Emily believed she had found her safe place. Nothing seemed capable of disturbing this picture-perfect moment. And yet, somewhere in the background, an invisible thread of tension had already begun to pull tighter. The music lingered in the air, wrapping everyone in a cocoon of joy and anticipation. Emily's smile trembled with emotion, her heart swelling as she caught glimpses of familiar faces, family who had supported her, friends who had cheered her love story from the very beginning. Each face seemed to radiate pride, as though her happiness was shared and multiplied by everyone present. Daniel's expression carried a mix of nerves and devotion, the kind of look only a groom deeply in love could have. It felt like a celebration not just of two lives joining, but of countless moments that had led them here. Still, within that harmony, there was an unspoken fragility, as though perfection itself was daring the universe not to test it. For Emily, every second of walking down that aisle became a memory she wanted to tattoo onto her heart. She saw herself reflected in Daniel's eyes, not just as a bride, but as a woman stepping into a new chapter, certain that love would protect her from life's storms. Each flicker of candlelight seemed to whisper reassurance, telling her this was destiny. Yet, even as joy swirled around her, a small chill passed through the room, so subtle that most dismissed it as nerves. It was the kind of sensation people only recognize later, when hindsight turns ordinary moments into foreshadowing. Daniel's hands twitched slightly as he waited for Emily to reach him, a subtle sign of anticipation mixed with unspoken weight. His mind wasn't just on vows or rings, it was on holding on to the future he'd promised. Around them, silence grew sacred, broken only by the soft rhythm of Emily's footsteps. But silence has a way of amplifying what goes unspoken, and in that hush, the room felt both tender and tense. Every eye in the audience reflected admiration, but some held curiosity, as if bracing for something they couldn't quite name. And perhaps they were right to feel it. The officiant stood ready, a gentle smile on his lips, his voice prepared to mark the beginning of what was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives. Emily reached Daniel, her hand trembling slightly as he took it, and their fingers locked like a vow even before words were spoken. For a moment, the world outside didn't exist, only the union of two hearts. Yet perfection has a strange way of inviting interruption, as though flawless beauty is too fragile to remain untouched. And in that stillness, the faintest shift in the air suggested that something, or someone, was about to arrive. Friends leaned forward in their seats, hungry to witness the exchange of promises, to see a love story they had rooted for finally reach its crescendo. Emily, glowing with hope, felt as though she had finally outrun every doubt and every fear that had once shadowed her journey. But hope, though radiant, is delicate. And just when she thought nothing could mar this day, the atmosphere thickened, heavy with an energy that couldn't be explained. It was as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Daniel tightened his grip on her hand, almost instinctively, like a man afraid of something slipping through his fingers. Emily took it as affection, unaware that he was fighting an unease buried deep within. His eyes darted for a fraction of a second, not enough for her to notice, but enough for the observant to wonder what weighed on him. A wedding is meant to symbolize certainty, yet beneath the surface, uncertainty had already taken root. And sometimes, what we fear most doesn't wait until after the vows, it barges in before they're spoken. As the officiant prepared to begin, Emily looked around one last time, soaking in the beauty of the scene she had dreamed about since she was a little girl. The glowing chandeliers, the delicate flowers, the proud tears glistening on her mother's cheeks, everything aligned like a scene scripted by fate. But life rarely follows scripts, and fate often hides its sharpest turns in moments of pure joy. Emily's breath caught, not from fear, but from the sheer overwhelming promise of forever. Little did she know, forever was about to be interrupted. And then, in the silence just before the words, "Dearly beloved," could echo, the air shifted again. The anticipation of vows seemed to collide with something darker, something waiting at the edge of that sacred space. Guests straightened, some exchanging curious glances as though they, too, sensed it. Emily's heart was wide open, convinced this moment would seal her happiness forever. But happiness, no matter how radiant, has shadows that follow closely behind. What Emily didn't know was that the wedding was about to stop in its tracks. The silence of the ceremony shattered the moment the heavy doors creaked open. Heads turned in unison, like a wave pulled by an unseen tide, and then came the gasps. A woman stepped inside, her heels striking the floor with unshakable confidence. Sophia. Daniel's ex. But it wasn't just her presence that stole the breath from the room, it was what she wore. A white dress. Not identical to Emily's gown, but close enough to blur boundaries, close enough to ignite whispers sharp as knives. Every eye narrowed, caught between disbelief and outrage, as though the sanctity of the day had just been pierced. Emily's body froze mid-breath, her joy caught in her throat like a glass shard. She blinked, almost as if willing herself to be mistaken, as though this apparition might dissolve if she simply ignored it. But Sophia's presence only grew heavier with every step she took down the aisle. The dress clung in a way that demanded attention, a deliberate echo of the bride without daring to be exact. Guests shifted uncomfortably, their murmurs rising like a storm cloud gathering above the couple. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, the rhythm no longer one of love but of dread. Daniel's gaze dropped instantly, his eyes unable, or unwilling, to meet Emily's. His jaw clenched, his shoulders stiffened, and yet he remained rooted in place. It was as if Sophia's arrival had awakened something inside him, something Emily couldn't yet name but already feared. She searched his face for answers, but all she found was avoidance, and in that silence, her mind filled with possibilities far worse than the truth. Because sometimes silence doesn't protect, it condemns. Sophia moved gracefully, almost theatrically, each step measured as though she knew every pair of eyes was locked on her. She didn't smile, but she didn't need to. The very act of showing up in that dress was louder than any words she could have spoken. It was rebellion wrapped in satin, a performance choreographed for maximum impact. People whispered behind delicate hands, torn between shock and curiosity, while others simply stared, wide-eyed, as if watching a story twist into something far more complicated than love alone could handle. The room transformed from a sanctuary of joy into an arena of judgment. Emily felt the heat of every stare, every unspoken question digging into her skin. Why is she here? What does this mean? Some guests looked at Sophia with pity, others with scorn, but all of them glanced back to the bride, waiting for her reaction. Her chest tightened as if the air itself had betrayed her, leaving her gasping in a moment that was supposed to be hers. And still, Daniel kept his silence, letting the tension spiral unchecked. Emily tried to steady her trembling hands, gripping her bouquet so tightly the stems nearly snapped. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but her voice felt stolen. The beauty of the ceremony, the flowers, the candles, the vows that had yet to be spoken, faded into background noise. All she could see was Sophia, seated deliberately near the front, her dress glowing almost defiantly under the soft lights. That image branded itself into Emily's mind, a cruel distortion of the purity she had hoped would define this day. The whispers grew bolder now, no longer hidden but woven into the atmosphere. People exchanged glances heavy with speculation, their judgment unrestrained. Was Sophia here to sabotage? To win Daniel back? To humiliate the bride? Emily could feel her world unraveling thread by thread, even as she forced herself to stand tall. But dignity, in moments like these, can feel like the thinnest armor against humiliation. Her chest burned, her eyes stung, but she refused to let her tears fall, at least not yet. Daniel shifted beside her, his hands twitching at his sides, as though he wanted to reach for Emily but couldn't. Or wouldn't. The distance between them was invisible but undeniable, stretched tighter by every second of silence. Emily's trust, once solid, began to tremble like glass under pressure. She wondered if everyone else could feel it too, that this wedding was no longer about vows, but about survival. The altar, once sacred, now felt like a stage where someone else had seized the spotlight. And as Sophia crossed her legs delicately in that front row seat, lifting her chin ever so slightly, Emily realized something terrifying. This wasn't just a careless choice of outfit. It was intentional. A message. A declaration hidden in fabric and color, screaming louder than words ever could. The white dress was a weapon, carefully chosen to wound without a single blade. But the dress was only the beginning. Sophia slid into the front row as though the seat had been reserved just for her. No invitation, no permission, just pure audacity. The air shifted, heavy with unspoken questions. Emily's pulse throbbed in her temples, her body stiff as stone, but her mind raced with confusion. Sophia's presence wasn't passive, it was deliberate, a bold reminder that she wasn't just part of Daniel's past, she was here to stake a claim in his present. Without saying a word, she had already hijacked the atmosphere of the entire ceremony. Every flicker of the candle seemed to highlight Sophia's face, as if the light itself betrayed Emily. Guests stole glances, careful not to stare too openly, yet unable to resist watching this silent drama unfold. Emily could feel their eyes on her too, weighing her reaction, judging every breath she took. Her hands trembled, though she tried to steady them against the bouquet. She asked herself over and over, why would Sophia do this? What does she want? But no answer came, only the crushing weight of not knowing. Daniel remained by her side, but his silence burned more than words ever could. He shifted slightly, his nervous glances darting towards Sophia and then quickly away, as if caught doing something forbidden. His body betrayed him, tense shoulders, clenched jaw, a faint tremor in his hand. Emily noticed it all. And with every twitch, her faith in him thinned, unraveling strand by strand. Silence was supposed to keep the peace, but in moments like this, it became an accomplice to suspicion. Sophia crossed her legs slowly, smoothing the fabric of her white dress with meticulous care, her every move calculated for impact. She didn't need to speak, her confidence filled the room like a trumpet no one could ignore. Emily could almost hear the unsaid words screaming beneath Sophia's composure, I belong here too. The audacity of it rattled her bones. It wasn't just disrespect, it was war, fought without weapons but with presence, power, and intent. The guests whispered in hushed tones, conversations half-muttered and quickly stifled. Still, the undercurrent was unmistakable. People were speculating, dissecting, and gossiping in real time. Emily caught fragments, snatches of words that made her stomach turn. Ex-girlfriend, white dress, unbelievable. These words swirled like daggers around her, and she felt naked under the weight of their scrutiny. It was no longer just a wedding, it was a public trial. Emily's mind spun through every possibility, every motive. Maybe it was jealousy. Maybe it was revenge. Or maybe it was something darker, something Daniel had failed to tell her. The questions tangled inside her, no thread to untie them. And each time she looked at Sophia's calm, composed face, she felt the ground beneath her begin to crack. A wedding was supposed to be the safest day of her life, yet here she stood, trapped in a silent battlefield she hadn't prepared for. The distance between Emily and Daniel felt like miles, even though he stood right beside her. She wanted him to take her hand, to anchor her, to prove to everyone that nothing could shake their bond. But his hand stayed limp at his sides. That absence screamed louder than vows could ever soothe. The man she trusted to fight for her seemed paralyzed, leaving her to battle shadows alone. And in that stillness, her heart filled with both fear and fury. Sophia's eyes flicked toward the altar, then back to Emily, her gaze sharp enough to cut. It was a look that carried no apology, no hesitation, only intention. Emily could feel herself shrinking under it, her breath shallow, her chest heavy. And yet, part of her burned with defiance, a desperate urge not to let Sophia win whatever game she was playing. But the rules were unclear, and the stakes had already shifted from love to survival. And then, just as Emily tried to convince herself this was nothing more than a cruel stunt meant to rattle her nerves, Sophia leaned ever so slightly toward the person sitting beside her. She whispered something, her lips barely moving, but her words carried just far enough to twist the air. Emily didn't hear the full sentence, only fragments, but those fragments were enough to make her blood run cold. Emily's mind spun as she caught snippets of conversation drifting from Sophia's corner of the room. Words like truth, secret, shouldn't marry, floated through the air, barely audible, yet heavy enough to curl her stomach with unease. The whispers weren't meant for her to hear, and yet they landed like stones in her chest. She tried to focus on the officiant, on Daniel's steady gaze, on the flow of the ceremony, but the fragments haunted every corner of her attention. Her heart hammered, not from joy, but from the sudden, gnawing tension that something hidden was about to surface. Around her, the guests shifted in their seats. Smiles faltered, eyes flicked nervously toward Sophia, and murmurs ran like electric currents through the rows of chairs. A few people exchanged concerned glances, unsure if they should intervene or simply watch. The room no longer felt safe. It was charged with a quiet suspicion, a sense that the day's perfection had been infiltrated. Emily could feel the walls of her dream tightening, pressing in, as if the very air conspired against her peace. Every familiar face now seemed tainted with doubt, and she felt unmoored, suspended in a space where nothing could be trusted. Daniel's posture remained rigid, his jaw set as he tried to maintain control, but Emily noticed the flicker of unease in his eyes. Every so often, his gaze darted towards Sophia, betraying the slightest crack in his composure. She wanted him to speak, to reassure her, but his silence screamed louder than any words could. In that silence, Emily felt a creeping fear that secrets might surface, truths too fragile to bear. The vows, the smiles, the ceremonial scripts, all felt like fragile armor against the storm that had quietly entered the room. Sophia's stare was relentless. She didn't need to say a word, her eyes alone carried messages sharp enough to slice through the wedding's calm. Emily felt trapped, each glance from her ex drawing tighter the invisible cage around her heart. Every promise spoken felt overshadowed by the uncertainty Sophia's presence had introduced. It wasn't just a gaze, it was a reminder that not all stories are told, that not all pasts are buried, and that even the brightest moments can hide shadows. Emily's breathing became shallow, her chest tightening as she tried to anchor herself in the ritual unfolding. She focused on the officiant's words, on the cadence of the vows, on the gentle music meant to soothe, but none of it reached her mind. The whispers, the half-heard warnings, the pointed glances, they all spun together, creating a web of doubt she couldn't escape. Guests around her fidgeted, the atmosphere thick with unease, and she realized that the wedding had silently shifted into something unrecognizable, a stage for secrets waiting to reveal themselves. Each movement Sophia made sent shivers down Emily's spine. A subtle tilt of her head, a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes, a quiet exhale, all of it seemed laden with meaning. Emily wanted to interpret it, to understand it, but the more she tried, the deeper the fog of uncertainty became. She glanced at Daniel again, searching for clarity, but found only hesitation. The man she had trusted to be her anchor now seemed caught in the same invisible tension, his silence echoing her own fear. The words, fragments as they were, kept swirling around Emily's mind like a persistent echo. Truth, secret, shouldn't marry. She tried to block them out, tried to remind herself that weddings are messy, that exes sometimes intrude without purpose. But her intuition screamed otherwise. The room's air had thickened, each breath carrying suspicion, and the joyous energy that had been there moments ago felt replaced by uncertainty. She could no longer fully inhabit her own moment, it belonged partially to someone else now. Emily's pulse quickened as the ceremony trudged forward. The music played, the officiant spoke, vows were exchanged, but all of it felt muted under the weight of Sophia's gaze and the whispers that lingered like smoke. Guests' expressions betrayed their unease, some leaning in toward each other for reassurance, others keeping cautious eyes on the unfolding tension. Emily felt herself shrinking in the midst of what should have been her triumph, aware that the day she had dreamed about was quietly transforming into a battlefield of secrets. And then, just as Emily thought she could endure the pressure, the whispers escalated into a subtle crescendo, threading through the air like a prelude to revelation. A word here, a hint there, each one sharper than the last, sending a jolt through her chest. Emily's stomach sank as she realized the next words, the ones that had yet to fully reach her ears, would strike harder than the white dress itself. Halfway through the ceremony, just as the officiant's voice wove into a gentle cadence of vows, Sophia rose from her seat. There was no dramatic gesture, no shouting, just the deliberate clearing of her throat, a sound that sliced through the ambient music and soft murmurs like a knife. Every eye in the room turned instinctively toward her, a collective curiosity and dread tightening the air. Emily's heart thudded violently in her chest, a rapid drumbeat of fear and disbelief. Guests froze mid-smile, some leaning forward in instinctive anticipation, as though bracing themselves for a storm. "There are things this bride deserves to know," Sophia said, her voice calm but carrying a weight that bent the room around it. Each word landed deliberately, heavy with intent, drawing gasps and whispers from the crowd. Daniel's face turned pale, his composure cracking just enough to betray a nervous tremor. Emily's chest constricted as if the very air had thickened, the bouquet she clutched suddenly felt unbearably heavy, like holding on to fragile hope in the midst of a gathering storm. A silence settled, almost reverential, but it was layered with tension that no one could ignore. The guests shifted uneasily, glances darting between Daniel, Emily, and Sophia. Murmurs erupted, low and insistent, the kind that only grow louder when curiosity and fear mingle. Emily felt every stare like a pulse of electricity against her skin. She searched Daniel's eyes, desperate for any sign of defense, reassurance, or explanation, but found only hesitation and guilt tangled in his expression. Sophia's calmness made the uncertainty worse. The poised manner suggested she had rehearsed this, calculated every reaction she might provoke. Emily's mind raced, trying to piece together what Sophia could mean. Secrets. Revelations. Something Daniel had hidden. The possibilities multiplied with every heartbeat, twisting anxiety into a sharp edge that pricked her chest. The guests' reactions mirrored her own internal turmoil. Some leaned forward, eager to witness the unfolding drama, while others recoiled slightly, uneasy in the sudden tension that had replaced celebration. Emily had thought she had prepared for this day, but preparation meant nothing when unpredictability walked in mid-ceremony. Daniel swallowed hard, and for a fleeting moment, Emily saw him falter. His hand twitched, his lips pressed tightly together, and the weight of unspoken truths pressed down on him visibly. Emily's stomach knotted as she realized the vows were no longer sacred, they had become fragile, fractured by the arrival of history that had refused to stay buried. She tried to steady her breathing, willing herself to remain calm, but the heat of embarrassment, fear, and anticipation roiled inside her. Each tick of the clock stretched the tension further. Sophia's eyes scanned the room with precision, lingering on guests whose expressions betrayed curiosity or doubt, before returning to Emily. Every look was measured, sharp, and deliberate, as if she were silently narrating a story only she fully understood. Emily's mind fought to reconcile the woman in front of her with the past she thought she knew. Each movement, each breath Sophia took felt orchestrated, a quiet chess game played on a stage of candles and floral arrangements. Emily could feel the crowd's energy shifting like a tide pulling against her stability. The whispers grew in frequency, subtle but insistent, a backdrop of rumor that threatened to drown her composure. Even the officiant paused, subtly adjusting papers in his hands, recognizing the fracture in the day's rhythm. Every familiar anchor, the love of family, the structure of ceremony, the music meant to soothe, was undermined by the weight of Sophia's single sentence. Emily felt unmoored, as if standing on the edge of a precipice without warning. Daniel's eyes met hers briefly, a flash of regret, panic, and uncertainty crossing his face. Emily searched for the man she had trusted, the one who had promised love and transparency, but the man before her seemed a stranger navigating a storm he could not control. Every heartbeat thumped in sync with the unspoken question lingering in the room: what could Sophia possibly reveal? Emily's chest tightened further, the fragile illusion of celebration giving way to the tension of impending exposure. And then Sophia paused, letting her words hang in the air like smoke. The crowd leaned in collectively, waiting, the room silent except for the faint rustle of fabric and a few held breaths. Emily's mind raced, imagining the worst while hoping for a miracle. She braced herself, clutching her bouquet as though it could anchor her to this moment. But just as the tension reached a peak, Sophia held back, and the full truth remained locked behind her calm facade. Sophia wasn't ready to reveal it all, not yet. Sophia leaned forward slightly, her voice lowering just enough to draw Emily's attention without fully addressing the room. Her words began to weave fragments of a past that Emily had never fully known. She spoke of nights Daniel had promised something he never delivered, moments that were erased from memory yet lingered in shadows. The details were delicate, precise, hinting at betrayals that Emily could feel gnawing at her trust. Each revelation was measured, a slow drip of discomfort that settled over the ceremony like an unexpected storm. Guests shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances loaded with suspicion. Some whispered quietly to their neighbors, trying to parse whether Sophia's recounting was fueled by lingering jealousy or a legitimate claim to the truth. The room hummed with uncertainty. Every face seemed to reflect a different emotion: pity, judgment, curiosity, and Emily found herself caught in the crossfire. The atmosphere had changed completely, celebration had been replaced by tension, and every smile or nod felt forced, hollow under the weight of hidden histories surfacing. Emily's eyes remained fixed on Sophia, desperate to read her intentions, to find a clue that might temper the growing fear in her chest. The words painted Daniel in shades she had never imagined, complex, flawed, human, but in ways that threatened to unravel the trust she had built. Daniel shifted beside her, tension visible in every muscle, but he said nothing. His silence screamed louder than Sophia's measured words, leaving Emily to piece together fragments of a story she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. The whispers spread like wildfire, cascading through the crowd as if they had been waiting for this moment to erupt. Guests leaned forward, their curiosity battling unease, while some looked away, unwilling to witness the cracks forming in what was supposed to be a perfect day. Emily felt the stares of strangers weighing her down, the same eyes that had once celebrated her happiness now sharpening the edges of doubt. Each word Sophia spoke seemed designed to unsettle, to shift reality slightly, and Emily's chest constricted with every subtle accusation hidden in the narrative. Sophia's tone remained calm, almost intimate, as she described Daniel's past with a clarity that made the events feel immediate. Nights unspoken of, promises broken, laughter and tears entwined in memories that had been silenced until now. Emily's mind reeled, trying to reconcile the Daniel she knew with the man Sophia painted. Doubt gnawed at her, small at first, then growing into a steady drumbeat of suspicion. Every glance from Daniel felt like it carried secrets too heavy for words, and Emily struggled to maintain the facade of composure in front of the guests. The crowd felt the tension thickening, a collective unease that made whispers unavoidable. Some exchanged shocked glances, others leaned in, hungry for every new detail. Emily felt their eyes as though they were physically pressing against her skin, a reminder that this wasn't just her moment, it was public, a spectacle of emotions. The ceremony continued, yet each word, each pause, each glance carried weight far heavier than vows and flowers. Every step forward was shadowed by secrets waiting to explode. Sophia's voice lowered even further, her words almost a whisper yet sharp enough to pierce the room. She hinted at nights that were never spoken of, truths hidden behind smiles and assurances. Emily's stomach churned, a mix of anxiety, fear, and the sudden awareness that the perfect image she had believed in was incomplete. She felt unmoored, her certainty slipping like sand through fingers, and with every syllable, Sophia's presence grew more menacing, more commanding, more impossible to ignore. Daniel's hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, a nervous rhythm that betrayed his composure. Emily's eyes sought his gaze, searching for the anchor that had always held her steady, but found only tension, guilt, and the shadow of secrets not yet spoken. The room hung in suspended disbelief, every whisper echoing the uncertainty that now threaded through the ceremony. Guests were caught between curiosity and discomfort, wondering whether Sophia's revelations were truth or manipulation. And then, in a move that made the entire room hold its breath, Sophia reached into her purse. Her fingers lingered inside for just a moment, and Emily felt her pulse spike. Every eye in the room followed, every guest sensing the gravity of what could come next. The anticipation was almost unbearable. Whatever she held, whatever was about to emerge, had the power to shatter everything that had been built that day. And in that moment, the wedding teetered on the edge of chaos. Sophia's hand emerged from her purse, holding a small stack of photographs and a few folded envelopes, each one humming with unspoken consequences. The room seemed to shrink, the air thickening as guests leaned in involuntarily, drawn to the silent promise of revelation. Emily's eyes widened as her heart began to hammer. She had feared some confrontation, some subtle reminder of the past, but the weight of tangible proof, evidence she could see and touch, sent a chill straight through her. The whispers of doubt were no longer abstract, they had taken shape before her. One by one, Sophia displayed the photographs, Daniel and her, together on nights Emily had believed he was elsewhere, messages exchanged at times he had assured her the past was closed. Emily's hands trembled as she absorbed the images, each one a small explosion of betrayal and disbelief. Gasps echoed softly around the room, guests exchanging looks of shock, some covering mouths in whispered horror. Every new detail made the walls of Emily's carefully constructed trust crumble further, the foundation of her belief in forever beginning to tilt dangerously. Daniel's eyes pleaded as he reached for her hand, voice breaking, "Emily, please, just listen. It's not what it looks like." But the words barely reached her, swallowed by the gravity of proof in her hands. Every fiber of her being felt the sting of deceit, the raw edge of humiliation stretching across her chest. Guests leaned closer, their curiosity morphing into judgment, their quiet murmurs slicing through the lingering music of the ceremony. Emily felt trapped, like a participant in her own unraveling story. The photographs and messages were detailed, precise, each one revealing that Daniel had maintained contact with Sophia long after promising their past was over. Emily's mind struggled to reconcile the man she loved with the one presented in front of her, captured in pixels and ink. The evidence was undeniable, cold, and exacting. It didn't lie. And with every whisper and stare from the guests, her sense of betrayal deepened, knotting her chest with the weight of unspoken questions. Sophia's expression remained composed, almost serene, as she handed over the documents. There was no anger, no theatricality, only the quiet authority of someone who knew the truth and wasn't afraid to show it. Emily felt the tension wrap around her like a vice, the room's energy shifting from curiosity to something heavier, darker. Every person present seemed to hold their breath, sensing the precarious balance between revelation and chaos. The wedding's romantic glow had been replaced with the cold sheen of exposure. Daniel's attempts to explain fell into the heavy silence that Sophia's proof had created. He stammered, gesturing toward the photographs, his voice laced with desperation. Emily's gaze cut him off, a mix of hurt and incredulity. Every excuse felt inadequate, every plea unconvincing. Her trust, once solid and unshakable, now seemed fragile, as though it could shatter with the slightest touch. The room was thick with tension, and the eyes of every guest silently demanded answers, validation, or confrontation. The guests' whispers became a low, continuous murmur, an almost audible current of speculation and judgment. Some leaned closer, curious to catch every detail, others stepped back, unsettled by the intensity of the unfolding drama. Emily could feel their collective gaze pressing down, amplifying the sting of betrayal that cut through her chest. It wasn't just Daniel's actions that hurt, it was the undeniable proof, visible to everyone, that had stripped her of innocence and certainty in an instant. Each photograph, each message, was a revelation in itself, a cascade of hidden truths brought to the surface. Emily's mind raced, trying to process the full scope of what she had just seen. How could she have missed it? How had Daniel kept this secret, and why now? The ceremony, meant to celebrate love and commitment, had transformed into a battlefield of evidence, whispers, and fractured emotions. Every detail she observed deepened the conflict between what she wanted to believe and what reality demanded she confront. And then, as if the storm of betrayal hadn't reached its peak, Sophia's eyes met Emily's with a subtle, almost imperceptible smile. Her voice lowered just enough to carry across the tension-laden room. The final revelation was still to come. Emily's pulse quickened, guests leaned forward, and Daniel's face went pale. Whatever Sophia had held back promised to shatter even the doubts that had already begun to form, leaving everyone in the room suspended on the edge of shock. Sophia's voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the raw weight of the truth she was about to lay bare. "I wasn't just his ex," she confessed, her eyes glimmering with unshed tears. "I still love him." The words hung in the air, heavier than any music or whispered gossip could ever be. The room seemed to pause, every guest frozen mid-breath, as if time itself had decided to hold still. Emily's chest tightened, her hands gripping the bouquet so hard it almost hurt. The white dress, innocent in appearance, suddenly transformed into a symbol of possession, of emotions unresolved, of claims silently made. Daniel's eyes widened, caught in a storm of shame and desperation. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried to speak, but the words faltered before they could reach Emily. His hands shook, his face pale, a mixture of guilt and confusion spreading across his features. Emily's vision blurred as tears pricked her eyes, unbidden and unstoppable. She had expected confrontation, perhaps, but never this, never an open declaration that the past still held a hold over her present. Her mind raced, struggling to reconcile the man she loved with the man who had kept so much hidden. Guests exchanged stunned glances, their whispers hushed yet electric, as if trying not to interrupt the gravity of the moment. Some leaned forward, captivated by the drama, while others recoiled, discomforted by the intensity of raw emotion spilling across the room. Emily could feel the weight of every eye on her, every judgment, every assumption, pressing into her chest. It was a surreal combination of humiliation, heartbreak, and disbelief. Every heartbeat thumped in sync with the tremor of tension, amplifying the drama to almost unbearable levels. Emily tried to speak, to demand answers, to assert some sense of control, but the words lodged in her throat. Sophia's declaration had pulled the rug out from under everything she had believed about this day, about Daniel, about the love that had been promised to her. Her mind raced with questions. How could he have hidden this? How could she have missed the signs? And most urgently, what would she do next? The moment was frozen in a haze of unspoken accusations and unbearable clarity. The bouquet in Emily's hand suddenly felt like an anchor she couldn't hold. Each petal seemed to carry the weight of years she had invested in trust and love, now crumbling before her eyes. Her tears fell freely, hot and unstoppable, carving tracks of raw emotion down her cheeks. Every witness in the room felt the gravity of the revelation, as though the air itself had thickened under the weight of Sophia's confession. The white dress, once a silent presence, now screamed with meaning, challenging every assumption Emily had made. Daniel's gaze flickered between Sophia and Emily, his inner turmoil visible in every small gesture, tightened fists, shallow breaths, nervous swallowing. He wanted to explain, to justify, to salvage something from the wreckage of his carefully maintained facade. But Emily's eyes, wide with hurt and shock, spoke louder than anything he could utter. In that frozen moment, he realized the consequences of hidden emotions and unresolved pasts. The room, once filled with anticipation and joy, was now saturated with tension, a fragile battlefield of hearts and loyalty. Sophia's presence radiated an almost magnetic tension, her quiet declaration sending ripples through the crowd. Every subtle movement, every controlled breath, was amplified by the silent shock of the audience. Emily felt trapped in the narrative, a participant in a story she hadn't written but was now forced to live. The whispers of the crowd were like background noise, irrelevant compared to the storm raging in her chest. Her mind spun with fear, anger, and disbelief, each emotion amplifying the other, spiraling toward an inevitable breaking point. Emily's hands shook as she lowered the bouquet slightly, trying to find footing in a moment that had become completely unmanageable. Her heart, though fractured by betrayal, began to pulse with the faintest spark of clarity. This wasn't just about Daniel or Sophia, it was about truth, about her own sense of self-respect, about refusing to be collateral in a story written by others. Every tear, every jolt of hurt, every whispered doubt in the room fueled the fire of a decision she knew she had to make. And then, as if the world had waited for her to claim it, Emily straightened. Her voice, calm but unyielding, rose just enough to cut through the charged silence. Every guest leaned in, anticipating her response, as the weight of the wedding hung on the cusp of revelation. The choice she was about to make would shatter expectations, challenge assumptions, and redefine the day entirely. But in that frozen moment, no one, least of all Daniel or Sophia, could predict the path Emily was about to take. Emily took a slow, steadying breath, letting the silence of the room fill her senses. The murmurs of guests faded into the background as she shifted her gaze, not toward Daniel as everyone expected, but directly at Sophia. Her eyes were sharp, unwavering, carrying a calm clarity that contrasted with the storm of emotions around her. "I already knew some of Daniel's past," she said, her voice measured but firm, but not all. The words hung in the air, slicing through the tension like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Sophia blinked, a flicker of surprise passing across her face, as if Emily's awareness had disrupted a carefully rehearsed script. The audience felt the subtle shift too. The room collectively leaned in, sensing a turning point, a twist they hadn't anticipated. Emily's calm defiance held the weight of authority. She wasn't just a bride caught in drama anymore. She was the center of control, the pivot on which the day's chaos now spun. Guests exchanged glances, murmurs stirring quietly, caught between shock and admiration. Emily's focus then shifted slowly to Daniel, whose face reflected a combination of fear, guilt, and anticipation. The silence that fell was deafening, broken only by the faint rustle of fabric and the occasional breath of a guest. Every eye followed the silent tension, holding on to Emily's next move. "Did you ever love me honestly?" she asked, her voice firm yet laced with heartbreak. The room seemed to hold its collective breath, the words resonating louder than any music or ceremony could have. Daniel's lips parted, closed, and parted again. He wanted to explain, to justify, to plead, but the weight of Emily's words and the gaze of everyone in the room pinned him down. There was no easy answer. The past, once hidden behind smiles and promises, now pressed on him with undeniable force. Every photograph, every whispered secret, every message Sophia had revealed loomed over him, creating a wall of consequences he could no longer escape. The guests felt the tension intensify with each passing second. Some shifted uneasily, unsure where to look, while others leaned in, captivated by the unfolding drama. The whispers that had buzzed quietly earlier now felt suspended, muted under the gravity of Emily's confrontation. Every heartbeat seemed magnified, echoing in the charged space as if the room itself was waiting for resolution. The silence wasn't emptiness, it was anticipation, judgment, and reflection all rolled into one. Sophia's expression flickered between satisfaction and unease. She had expected Daniel to crumble under scrutiny, but Emily's unexpected composure and clarity disrupted her carefully orchestrated plan. The audience could feel the subtle power dynamic shift, the focus moving from accusation to revelation, from chaos to controlled confrontation. Emily's presence dominated the room, transforming vulnerability into strength, hurt into authority. Daniel swallowed hard, the weight of the question pressing down like a physical force. He wanted to speak, but the words felt inadequate, insufficient to bridge the chasm between truth and deception. Emily's eyes never wavered, holding his gaze with unwavering determination, signaling that she would not accept anything less than honesty. The room waited, frozen in time, each breath amplified by the gravity of what was unfolding. Emily could feel every emotion converging inside her, pain, betrayal, disappointment, but they fueled clarity rather than chaos. The question she had asked carried more than a search for truth. It carried the power to redefine the outcome, to reclaim control over a day that had teetered on the edge of disaster. Her voice, steady and deliberate, echoed through the room, imprinting the gravity of the moment into the hearts of every witness. And then, in the deep silence that followed, the room collectively realized that Emily's decision, unspoken but fully formed, would change everything. Every guest, Daniel, and even Sophia felt the weight of anticipation, the kind that lingers before history is rewritten. The air vibrated with the promise of resolution, of choices made from strength rather than fear. In that suspended moment, the wedding was no longer about vows or traditions, it was about truth, dignity, and the power of one woman to define her own story. Emily lifted her hand slowly, letting the veil slip from her face. The room seemed to exhale in collective tension, as if even the walls were holding their breath. She stepped forward, each movement deliberate, calm, and infused with strength. Her gaze swept across the guests, Daniel, and finally Sophia, unflinching and resolute. "A wedding is built on love," as she began, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed crowd, "but only truth can hold it together." The words landed like a hammer, reverberating in every ear, and the weight of their meaning sank into the stunned silence. Sophia's expression crumbled, her carefully maintained composure melting into tears that streamed freely down her face. Her white dress, once a silent proclamation of unspoken desire, now seemed fragile and hollow under the force of Emily's clarity. The whispers of admiration, shock, and disbelief rippled through the room. Guests exchanged glances, some in awe of Emily's courage, others still processing the magnitude of the confrontation. The atmosphere was thick with emotion, a mix of relief, tension, and the echo of lessons learned too late for some. Daniel's face drained of color, his jaw tightening as he tried to find words that could mend the chasm Emily had exposed. His eyes searched hers, desperate for forgiveness, for understanding, for anything that might salvage what had been broken. But Emily's steady gaze, unyielding and resolute, left no room for excuses. She had seen the truth, absorbed it, and made her choice. The power of honesty, once ignored, now defined the moment, leaving Daniel speechless in the wake of her decision. The guests watched in a mixture of awe and tension as Emily's refusal echoed through the ceremony hall. She stepped away from the altar, dignity intact, a symbol of courage in the face of betrayal. The murmurs that had buzzed throughout the room fell into silence, replaced by a profound awareness of the importance of truth. Every carefully curated photograph, whispered secret, and hidden message had led to this instant of clarity, where integrity triumphed over deception, and self-respect over manipulation. Emily's chest rose and fell steadily as she moved toward the edge of the ceremony space, feeling the weight of the past lift slightly with every step. She had loved deeply, trusted fully, and now she was reclaiming herself. The room, once full of scandal and whispers, became a witness to empowerment, to the strength it takes to confront lies without losing grace. The white dress, which had symbolized disruption and tension, now served as a stark reminder: no deceit remains hidden forever, and truth, when revealed, commands respect. Sophia, broken by Emily's unwavering stance, sank into a chair, tears flowing freely. She had hoped for confrontation, for chaos, perhaps even for attention, but Emily's choice stripped the moment of theatrics. There was no audience for manipulation, no applause for claims left untrue. The reality of actions, of honesty, and of boundaries had prevailed. Each guest, from family members to friends, felt the gravity of witnessing someone reclaim authority over their own life, refusing to let betrayal dictate their story. Daniel remained rooted in place, the echo of Emily's words still lingering in his mind. He realized that no explanation could rewrite the past, no apology could instantly restore trust. The truth had been revealed, and with it came the undeniable power of choice. Emily's decision, calm yet resolute, illustrated a principle stronger than vows alone: love without truth is fragile, and respect for oneself must never be compromised for the sake of appearances or tradition. The room was silent now, the tension replaced with a quiet reflection. The ceremony, intended to celebrate union and joy, had transformed into a profound lesson on honesty, courage, and self-respect. Guests absorbed the moment, some nodding slowly, others exchanging silent glances that spoke volumes. The white dress, once a provocative symbol of unresolved desire and past entanglements, now represented the inevitability of truth surfacing, of consequences finally being acknowledged, and of the power of personal integrity. And as Emily walked away from the altar, stepping toward a future defined not by betrayal but by clarity, the lesson was clear to everyone present: life rewards those who face reality with courage, confront deception with dignity, and choose self-respect over the comfort of denial. The white dress would remain a memory, a catalyst, a reminder that even the most beautiful ceremonies cannot withstand the weight of hidden truths, but the strength to act decisively, with honor, can transform even the deepest wounds into lessons for a lifetime. In the end, a wedding can be stopped by secrets, but a life cannot be built on lies. Emily walked away that day, not as a bride, but as someone who refused to let her heart be broken in silence. Because sometimes, the most powerful "I do" is saying "I don't." If this story touched your heart, subscribe to our channel for more emotional wedding stories filled with love, betrayal, and unforgettable twists. And tell us in the comments, what would you do if this happened at your wedding?